Welcome to Canine IQ Dog Reactivity for Dog Trainers. This video is a short teaser for the course covering the component naturally occurring negative reinforcement. The next part that I want to talk about is natural negative reinforcement. Now this is a terminology that a lot of people haven't used before, but I'm pretty sure that most of you are aware of it without actually knowing what it is that you're seeing. But before we go into that, we need to talk about what negative reinforcement is. So negative reinforcement can best be described as the removal of a direct or perceived aversive stimulus to strengthen a specific behavior. Now this is something that we've been taught right from day one. It's effectively the removal of something aversive or pressure, right? So in order for this to happen, the dog must already have a form of negative association with the stimulus for this association to take place. So if the dog doesn't understand that something is aversive, removing it doesn't contribute to negative reinforcement. And this is important because the dog has to actually have that direct negative association with the stimulus for that stimulus to be considered negative. So where I think traditional thinking has led us a little bit astray is that traditional thinking around negative reinforcement was based around the intensity of the aversive stimulus and that it needed to have a direct physical impact with the dog. And a lot of people classify it as physical pain. And it's so much more than just physical pain. So to further compound my understanding of this, I've had a lot of discussions with some leading human behavioral psychologists just to get a different take on it, because once you step outside the dog world, you get a cleaner understanding of psychology. And one of the things that was brought out is that all that is needed is effectively a perceived aversive stimulus or a negative pressure to be present, or that even a relationship whereby the stimulus is aversive by association to another stimulus can also have the same result. So if we break that down into a little bit more detail, so if a dog perceives something to be unpleasant, the removal of that can be seen to be the removal of an aversive stimulus. If the dog feels pressure that is uncomfortable, the removal of that pressure can be seen as negative reinforcement. Aversive by association, if the dog is doing something that's enjoyable but there's something else that's more enjoyable, then associating the two together, the one that's least enjoyable, if you remove that, is a degree of negative reinforcement to get access to something that's more enjoyable. So when you start to expand your vision as to what negative reinforcement is, it tends to open up a whole dynamic of how we can actually apply negative reinforcement to sharpen behavior. It's not about introducing pain and making the dog avoiding a pain threshold. That is antiquated thinking. So modern day thinking is something that the dog perceives to be aversive directly or in association to something else. So if we look at a couple of direct examples, a perceived aversive stimulus could be if the dog has been attacked by a Great Dane and the dog has a particular issue with that particular breed. Simply being in the presence of a Great Dane can trigger a form of aversion in the dog, and the removal of the Great Dane can actually help the negative reinforcement component. That's one thing. Aversive by association. How many of you have actually got the dog to sit through guide show place where there's no reward happening in that sit? And once the dog actually has a nice calm sit, you throw a ball and you release the dog out of it. So the aversive component in that particular situation by association is that sit, while it's not incredibly uncomfortable compared to chasing a ball, is pressure. And the removal of that pressure is negative reinforcement, and all of a sudden the dog enjoys the experience. So why I find that incredibly fascinating, to me it was effectively a watershed moment, because like I said before, it now gives you significantly more tools to actually utilize to put the dog in lots of varied stressful scenarios that are really low pressure, that are not really invasive on the dog, that can actually teach the dog that if you remove this pressure, that there's a negative reinforcement component that makes you happy. And if we then extrapolate that, if we look at natural negative reinforcement, that is the way that a dog naturally uses negative reinforcement to remove pressure in any given situation. So it's actually driven internally by the dog. So how is natural negative reinforcement applicable? So if we look at negative reinforcement in itself, when dealing with negative reinforcement, most dog trainers, and this is across the board, most dog trainers tend to think of it in terms of training a dog for action whereby the reinforcement is to strengthen a desirable behavior or to produce a good desirable behavior. That's all well and good if we just want to use it to produce positive outcomes in a dog. What most dog trainers do not realize is that with behavioral disorders, negative reinforcement is used by the dog in many cases to remove an aversive stimulus, and this can be a maladaptive response. So technically, if a dog has learned that showing aggression when another dog turns up gets that other dog to go away, then the dog starts to learn that that aggressive behavior is the mechanism to remove the pressure. So that mechanism itself delivers the negative reinforcement. By removing the other dog, it actually feels good, and the more it does it, the more it becomes what we call that maladaptive behavior. It makes the dog more stressed going forward, but it actually learns to remove stress by doing dysfunctional behaviors. So technically, this can be termed as natural negative reinforcement, where the dog is using the foundations or the traits of negative reinforcement to naturally remove an aversive or a perceived aversive stress. So if we then start to quote some people in the industry, so Mr. Boyd Hooper, one of my favorite sayings of his is, confidence is the memory of past success. Now this is a really profound statement, because it has equal meaning for situations triggering failure or negative association, as well as future positive success. So if I do something today and it produces a result tomorrow that's predictable, I'll keep doing that every single time that scenario turns up. So if a dog gets aggressive when it sees another dog turning up and it gets that dog to disappear, then the dog's confidence in the future is, if I keep doing this, I can remove the pressure. So past behavior largely affects future learning. Stephen Lindsay breaks natural or negative reinforcement down in a very, very detailed way. The withdrawal of the aversive stimulation evokes opposing pleasurable emotional reactions. When an aversive stimulus is terminated, the opposing pleasurable recall provides a source of covert reinforcement, either strengthening desirable alternative behavior or inadvertently reinforcing undesirable behavior. That's an amazing statement. Most people, if you're like me, I had to read this about 35 times to get a handle on it. But effectively, the removal of pressure, because it's a reinforcement, makes you feel as good as actually getting a positive reinforcement as a result of having done something. So Stephen Lindsay talks about negative reinforcement as strengthening a desirable behavior, but it also inadvertently reinforces an undesirable behavior. So if we look at the dog getting in first mentality that we talked about before, if a dog turns up and it causes this dog to get aggressive, then it knows that if I'm aggressive, I scare you away. So the more I do this, which is undesirable behavior to my handler, it removes the pressure that that dog is causing, which makes me do this more and more often, and then that becomes a future path to success. So I learned that dysfunctional behaviors will lead to success in getting rid of pressure, even though these dysfunctional behaviors make me feel bad. Really important understanding, because natural negative reinforcement is something that we need to shift the dog away from in terms of a palette of behaviors, and get the dog to learn to do more constructive behaviors to get success. Thanks for watching this video. If you like this teaser, I'm certain you will love the full courses. You'll find a link to the course in the description below. If you're interested, want to have a look at the other teaser videos as well. They're all free.